Hello, everyone. Thank you for joining this webinar. And I hope, as I confirmed already with some of the audience, that you can hear me clearly and you can also see the slides and you can also see my video. So in case there is any issue at any point, I would really appreciate if somebody flag it to me. So what are we going to discuss, or what are we going to be focusing in this webinar? So as the title itself suggests, we are going to talk about that what is a literature review, why do we do literature reviews, how to conduct a literature review. That would be the main part of this webinar. And lastly, what tools we can use to conduct literature reviews. Now, before we jump into the webinar, you can post your questions through the Q&A session. And we'll have like around 15 minutes in the end to take questions and answer those questions. So who am I? I am Fahimullah, and I am an assistant professor and program director at the University of Adelaide in Australia. Now, these are some of the recent literature reviews that I have done and I have published. So you can see that in some of them, I am the lead author. In others, I am the co-author. The reason I am showing these is to sort of give you an idea that I have been doing literature reviews, and as you might be able to see that all of them have been published in quite good journals. So the point is that I have some bit idea of this topic, how to do literature reviews, but more so we'll focus on how we can do it more efficiently, how we can use tools like Scholarcy to reduce the time and effort it takes to do a high quality literature review. Now, the most important point is that why we even do literature reviews, right? So the participants who are here, most of you would be PhD students, or you would be a master's student or an undergraduate student, or even a researcher, say a postdoc or an academic. Now, whenever we are doing a project, we have to sort of look at its feasibility. We have to make sure that it is worth doing it. For example, for PhD students, when you start your PhD at the end of your first year or after 6 months, you have to present your research proposal to a committee and you need to justify that why you are doing this research. So in such cases, the first thing you present or you justify is that what research you want to do. Okay. So for example, you want to see the impact of ChatGPT on education, that how ChatGPT has impacted the learning of students around the world. Okay, so that's, let's suppose, your research topic. The next question that you answer at that time is that why you want to do this research. Okay, so here you simply justify the significance of your research, that why it is important to do this research. Okay, for example, in for the example that I have given about the impact of ChatGPT on education, you can say that it is an evolving topic. ChatGPT came in and other generative AI tools came in, and you want to find out that how it impacts the learning curve of students. Okay. The third question you have to answer at that point is that how you are going to do this research. Okay, so this is where the methodology part comes in, that are you going to do human study? Like, for example, you are going to collect data through a survey from students. Are you going to interview students? Are you going to collect data, let's suppose, from media, that, okay, you go and you scrape data from social media. So here you justify your methodology, that how you're going to collect data, how you're going to analyze the data, you're going to report the data, and so on and so forth. Okay. Now, the fourth question is that what has already been done. So you need to tell the committee or to anyone to whom you are presenting your research that what is the state of art, what others have already done. For example, the same topic, it's been there for a couple of years or so. So many papers have been already published, which looks into the impact of ChatGPT on education. So the point here is that you don't want to reinvent the wheel. You do not want to do something that has already been done and published. You want to do something novel and at the same time something that has significance. So this is where literature review comes in. In order to answer this question, that what has already been done with respect to a particular topic, you need to conduct a literature review. Okay. And only then you can position the novelty of your research. If you don't know what other researchers have done, what research has been published with respect to a particular topic, you would not be able to justify the novelty of your research. Okay. So that is why every research student, be it a master's student, be it a PhD student, or even in some cases the postdocs, they have to do literature reviews to position the novelty of their research. Okay. Now, what is a literature review? So essentially, what goes into this process is the research papers. So for example, if you have to do a literature review on the topic of the impact of ChatGPT on the learning of students or on education generally, you need to identify papers that talk about this topic. So if you go to, let's suppose, Google Scholar or any other database, and if you just search this topic, you will find many papers that have already been published. So the first step is that you identify, select those papers, then you compile those papers, you arrange them in a certain way, and then you summarize the findings of those papers. You look into the contributions that have been made by those papers. Based on that, you identify gaps, then you look at inconsistencies, and that eventually comes forms the foundation for new research. Okay, so what goes into the whole process is the selected papers related to that topic, and what comes out of that whole process is foundation for new research, which if we relate it to the topic that to the slide that I presented earlier, is that if you have to justify the novelty of your research, you have to look at how it positions with respect to the existing work. Now, the first question that many students ask is that where do we look for literature? So there are many different databases that are available through which you can find relevant literature. For example, there is Google Scholar, there is Scopus, there is Archive, and so on and so forth. Now, which one you need to select? That really depends upon which domain you are in. Okay, so if you are, for example, in medical databases, if you're in medical field, iSight or PubMed, that might be more relevant to you. For someone like me, who is from the computer science domain, the ones that I mentioned here, these are the ones who are relevant to me. So the reviews that or the literature reviews that I do, I mostly go and find papers from IEEE Explore, Scopus, Science Direct, and so on. So which ones to select? You need to look into your own domain and select the databases in a way to make sure that not even a single paper goes missing. Okay. The more you have like the databases, the more you reduce the chances of having a paper missed. Now, this is something you might disagree with, or some of you might agree with, that for me, in my experience, it takes around 3 to 5 months to do a high quality literature review and to publish it. My experience is that doing a primary study, it takes little time and effort, as compared to a secondary study or a literature review. Because you have to do the selection very carefully, you have to extract data from papers, you have to analyze the data, and then you need to report the data. So that whole process takes quite significant amount of time. Now, the point to note here is that, can we reduce this time? For example, around 8 years ago, when I was doing my first literature review, I used to do everything manually, because at that time there was not this boom of tools that you have at hand and that you can use to reduce this time and effort. But now the case is different. Now there are many tools that are available, and you can use those tools to reduce the time and effort without impacting your learning curve, because that's not the purpose. What the purpose of these tools should be is to remove the redundant or repetitive tasks from your disk. Okay, so this was my experience. I'm sure that everybody, and maybe in different domains, it's different. And in my understanding, in a PhD project, which is from 3 to 5 months, this is a significant amount of time which goes into the literature review. So if there are ways through which we can reduce this time, that time can go into more primary research that we can do. Now comes the type of literature review. So I see that many students, they have reached out and they wanted to understand the different types of reviews that we have. Now, again, this is very much subjective to the domains in which we are doing research. For example, in my domain, systematic reviews or state-of-the-art reviews, those are very common. But in other fields, I know that people do critical review, people also do scoping review, and so on and so forth. The type, it is important to determine at the start, because everyone follows they have their own certain steps that you need to follow in order to publish your review and in order to conduct high quality review. So in this talk, we are not going to go and talk about every single type of review. The way I organize this webinar is to give information that could be applicable to all types of review. Okay, so I picked up the common stuff. In that way, we can cover or make this webinar beneficial for a broader audience. Of course, some steps, they might be different. So my suggestion is that before you start a review, for all of them, there are guidelines that have been developed. For example, for systematic review, Barbara's Sketchingham guideline is very popular, and that is mostly followed. Similarly, for other types of reviews, there are their own guidelines that you need to follow. Because it's important that when you claim in your paper that, let's suppose your literature review is a systematic literature review, then it becomes important that you follow all the steps of a systematic literature review. If you do not follow, then if you submit your review for publication to a journal, the reviewers will pick up this point that, okay, since you're claiming that your literature review is of a certain type, let's say systematic review, then you're missing this particular aspect, or you have not done this thing as per the guideline of systematic literature review. So that is very important, that when you are picking a particular type, you make sure that you have access to the guideline for conducting that kind of review, and you adhere to that guideline. Okay, now as far as the structure of a literature review is concerned, at a broader level or at an abstract level, it can be divided into 3 main parts, which is the introduction, main body, and conclusion. So introduction, essentially you introduce the topic, you motivate the topic, and then the entire meat of your literature review goes into the main body. In conclusion, where you put way for the for the future, that okay, what are the different gaps in this particular field, and what could be the common trends and patterns that can be followed by practitioners. So we'll talk about that, but in a different way. So this is at a broader level. You can divide your literature review, or you can sort of look at your literature review from this perspective. But when it comes to writing a literature review, then it has these different parts. So a literature review, like any other research article, it starts with the introduction section. And in introduction, of course, you sort of introduce the topic, but the main thing that I look for in a literature review is that the motivation for it. Can you justify that why there is a need for this literature review or not? For example, if there is a topic and there already exist, 10 literature reviews on the same topic, then doing an 11th literature review is unlikely to bring something new. So you need to make sure that there is a need for this literature review before you go and write the rest of your paper. The second section is background and related work. Now, this is important that background, I particularly, if I'm reading a paper that is not directly in my domain, so I do like that in the background section, authors have given sort of, the basic information that in order to understand this paper, these are the terms and these are the concepts that you need to understand. And related work section, very important. It's important because here, what I look for is that how different or how close your research is with respect to other papers. So in the related work section, you have to compare your literature review with the existing literature reviews on that topic. And you need to draw a line that, okay, this is what was missing in those literature reviews. And this is what is being filled. This gap is filled by my literature review. The literature reviews that I really liked when, or the related work section, is when there is a table and there is a tabular comparison of the different features of your study with the existing studies. This is what I like, and this is what is mostly followed in my field, but there might be other better methods of comparing your literature review to existing literature reviews to make sure that there is a significant level of novelty. The third one is methodology. So research methodology is a section where you justify that the way you have conducted this literature review is correct. And you put forward the information that if another researcher want to replicate your literature review, they can do it following your research methodology. So here, this is a very important section. In fact, irrespective of a literature review or a primary study, this is a section which is more closely looked at to see that how, in how much reliable way this research has been conducted. The fourth section is the results, where as I mentioned, the meat of your paper goes, or your literature reviews goes into. Here you report trends, you report patterns, you report the kind of commonalities that exist among the research papers in this field, field that you're looking into. The next section is application for researchers. So you have done a literature review, and the outcome of it is often for researchers. So many a times the situation is that, like, for example, if I am reading a literature review, I do not read the entire literature review, perhaps due to time or whatever reasons. The main aspect that I look into is that, okay, what is the outcome of this literature? What is in it for me as a researcher? Did they disclose a new direction? Did they identify the gaps or not? So this is a very important section, implication for researchers. Okay. The next one is implication for practitioners. So here you sort of look at the industry and their needs, and then you build something or report something for them. For example, if there are some common data sets that are being used for the evaluation of a particular system. And similarly, if there are certain trends being followed, then you report them, and that benefit practitioners. Practitioners mean people who work in industry. And the next one is limitations. So here any research that we do, there are certain limitations, certain threats to it. For example, there might be a thread that a paper that is not in English that might be missed from this literature review, right? And similarly, there could be other threats. So any limitations of your research that should go into this section. And lastly, conclusion, where you give some concluding remarks that, okay, what is the main gist of your research and what could be done in future based on this literature review. Okay. Now, we are going to focus here on the research methodology, that how to conduct a literature review. Okay, and more so that how we can use tools to make our job easier as far as literature reviews are concerned. Now, how do we do a literature? So these are the steps, okay, the basic steps. The first thing which I mentioned is the need for review. Do you really need to do a literature review? Is there a need for it? And if there is a need for it, what kind of a review you need? So this thing you need to really be sure about before you sort of commit your 5 or 6 months into a literature review. The next thing is, the second point is defining research questions. The third point is conducting a pilot study. Fourth one is designing a search string. Fifth one is inclusion and exclusion criteria. And sixth one is selection of relevant studies. Fourth one is extraction of data. And lastly, we need to analyze and report data. Now, I went a bit quickly on these points because next we are going to jump deep dive into each of them. But how do we do each of them? The first one, which is the purpose of your literature review or the need for your literature review, that why you essentially need to do a literature review. So there are multiple reasons why we do a literature review. As I mentioned, as a PhD student, you want to do a literature review so that you can identify a gap in that particular area. As in, we have been doing literature reviews of fields as a postdoc I did, where you sort of try to understand trends in a field. And those trends usually are beneficial for industry people. Similarly, you can validate certain findings through a literature review. You can have a direction that, okay, which direction, let's suppose you want to write for a grant and you want to see that, okay, you know, where the future direction is as far as the particular field is concerned. So this thing need to be established first before you go and you start doing a literature review. Okay, now the second thing is research questions. So once you identify the purpose, then the second thing is research questions. Now, some of the literature reviews, they don't even have research questions. I personally really like to have research questions because that sort of gives me in one look the idea that what this literature review is about. So in identifying research questions, it's really critical and important part. So what happens is that as a master's student, as a PhD student, you do not have the sort of that kind of experience that you can alone define the research questions. So the first thing you need to do is that you need to sit with your supervisor, with your advisor, and you need to discuss with them about a field. There should be sort of discussions and brainstorming, and through that you need to define or sort of, you know, determine that, okay, this is a field that we want to go deep into. Then you need to define an initial set of questions. Then you need to sort of contrast it with the challenges and solutions in that field that you can come across manually or in a sort of in an abstract way. Then you need to define the scope of the literature review. Now, this is very important. I have personally received multiple times these comments from reviewers on my literature reviews that, what is the scope of your review? Which means that what is included there and what is not included there. Okay, so I highly recommend that in the methodology section or even in the introduction section, try to define it that, okay, you know, this is what is included in my literature review and this is what is not included in my literature review. For example, if you're doing a literature review on, let's suppose, pervasive computing, okay, so there might come topics like IoT, fog computing, edge computing, and so on. So you need to mention that, okay, you know, what is the scope of your review? Do you include edge computing or not? Do you include fog computing or not? So this is, I'm giving an example from my field, but I'm sure that you're getting the point of what I mean by defining the scope of your literature review. And once the scope is defined, then you sort of, in discussion with your supervisors or advisors, you define concrete questions. Now, I have given an example. These are a couple of questions from one of my literature review. Okay, so the whole literature review revolved around these two questions. Okay, now pilot study, this is sort of important. I really like that I or my students do pilot study. So here you sort of do a literature review on a small scale. Let's suppose you have your review includes, let's suppose 100 papers. So what you do is that you manually identify 10 papers which are directly relevant to your research questions. And you see that, whether you are able to answer the questions from those 10 papers or not. If you are, then that's fine, move ahead. If not, then there is something you need to fix. There is something wrong. You need to go back to your research questions. Now, search string, this is again something that is maybe all other researchers don't follow. I really like it to define a search string so that I can select the papers very easily from these databases. So these databases like Google Scholar or IEEE Explore, you have to design a search string for them so that it returns the right set of papers to you. Now, if you would have done pilot study, you would already know that, okay, these 10 papers are relevant. If your search string is returning those 10 papers, then it means that the search string is correct. If it's not returning those papers, then it means that you need to further modify your search string. Because if you just simply put terms like ChatGPT for education or impact of ChatGPT on Google Scholar, it might return 5,000 papers. So you can't go through all the 5,000 papers to select the relevant papers. So you need to be more concrete in terms of defining your search string so that you retrieve the right set of papers. Okay, inclusion and exclusion criteria. Now, when you even have a good search string, you will get like maybe 1,000 papers returned from a database. Now you can't again go for 1,000 papers to be included in your research, in your literature review. So what you need to do is that you need to define some criteria that what I can include and what I do not include in my literature review. For example, this is an example of one of my literature reviews that I defined a criteria. So for example, I mentioned that any paper that is not in English would not include it, or any paper that is not being peer reviewed, I will not include it. So that way you sort of reduce the number of papers and you make sure that only the most relevant papers goes into your literature review. Now, selection of the relevant studies, it's a stepwise process. You first do the automated search. As I mentioned that you design the search string, you put it in the database and it gets you some papers. Then you go and you look at the titles of those papers and you make a selection of the relevant papers. Then because you're using multiple databases, so there might be papers duplicated across databases. So you remove those papers. Next, what you do is that you select studies based on abstract. You read the abstract. Then again, the number goes down. Then you select based on the whole text. And finally, you do snowballing of the papers to retrieve papers based on the references. So if you look at the example that I have given, so I have used 6 different databases like IEEE, Explore, Scopus, and so on. So the title-based, the automated search, it returned at around 4,600 papers. The title-based selection, it reduced it to 748 papers. Then when I removed the duplicates, it came down to 516. Then when I read the abstract, so I could further remove papers and I reduced to 168. And then I read the full text of these 168 papers, which reduced to 69. And 5 papers got edited through snowballing. So I had a final number of 74 papers in my literature review. Once you select the papers, then what you need to do is that you need to define a data extraction form. Okay, so the data extraction form guides you that what you want to extract from the papers. For example, some demographic data like the author's year and so on and so forth, and some very concrete data. Like for example, in my case, I defined it, okay, for example, what technique they have proposed, what are the quality attributes they have addressed in this paper, and so on and so forth. So you need to very carefully design the data extraction form. You need to cross-check it. You need to make sure that this is the correct one. You need to discuss it with your supervisor because that is the way you would extract data from the papers. As far as analysis and reporting of data is concerned, so again, this is a very big topic. We can't go into it directly, but once you extract the data, you need to analyze the data and you need to use some proper method to analyze the data. For example, you can use thematic analysis, you can use statistical analysis, you can use qualitative analysis, you can use grounded theory, and so on and so forth. There are many different methods. So again, this is something you need to decide that which one is the most suitable for your literature review. And then using those methods, you try to look for patterns, trends, and insights in the data that you have extracted. And your ultimate goal is to find out that what would be the future research directions in this field and what could be the implications of what has been done for the practitioners. Now, the first part of this webinar is completed. We covered that what is a literature review and how we can do a literature review. Okay. Now, the next part is that what tools we can use for literature review. Now, there are many different tools that you would come across. One of the tools that I strongly recommend, I have explored and I have been using it for maybe more than a year, is this one. Okay, Scholarcy. Now, the question is that how this tool can help you in different phases of your literature review. Okay, if you remember the earlier in the start, I mentioned that it takes around 3 to 5 months to do a literature review. But with tools like Scholarcy, you can reduce the amount of time and the amount of effort that goes into this process. So in the second part, what we are going to do is that we are going to talk about that how Scholarcy can help you in your literature review process. So the first thing is that this tool, it can help you to access complex academic literature in an easy way. Okay, so I'll show you in the next few slides that with this tool, you can kind of, I'll show you as well through a demo that you can very easily access the literature that you want to include in your literature review. Okay, the second one is that it can help you to organize and manage your references. So the papers that you want to include in your literature review, you can very easily manage, organize in the form of different categories within this tool. The third one is that it has a feature called flashcards. So, and that is amazing. That feature, you will, in a glance, in the blink of an eye, you will see all the relevant information from that paper using this tool. And lastly, it can help you to transition very easily from reading papers to writing papers. Generally, this tool is sort of, it helps you to organize, it helps you to read papers, and it helps you to extract data from the papers. Okay. Now, how it does that, we are going to have a look. So here, if we see, this tool Scholarcy, it has different features. For example, it has libraries, and those libraries, it help you to manage your literature. Okay, so for someone like me, I'm in the research field for maybe around 10 years, and I might have read thousands of papers in the last 10 years, but I don't have a track of it because I did not use a proper method of managing all the literature. But now you can do that with tools like Scholarcy. The second feature, as I mentioned, that's very amazing is flashcards. So you can screen your articles, like the screening process that I was showing, that you do the title-based selection, abstract-based selection, full text selection, and so on. So that becomes really easy for you through this tool. The third one is research comparison. So this is something amazing. When you look at a paper in Scholarcy, it can tell you that how this relates to previous research, whether it agrees to previous research, where it disagrees with the previous research. And the fourth point is that it has a feature where you can directly extract the important points from a paper. Okay, so you don't have to read the whole paper. You just click on important points and it will pick it up for you from the paper. The fifth one is article summarization. So this is amazing. I know there are many tools which can help you summarize articles or papers for you, but the interesting thing with Scholarcy is that what it does is that it gives you very customizable summary. So what is the length of the summary you want? which sections you want to summarize, where you want to focus, where you don't want to focus. So this is very much customizable summary, and it is not like, for example, abstract of your paper or the introduction of your paper. It gives you in a very easy to understand kind of summary of your article. So I know, I mean, for someone like me, I don't remember that maybe, in the last 1 year, I have read a whole paper word by word. Because as you grow further in your career, what you will do is that you will be more sort of, your depth of reading would be more and more becoming abstract level of reading. So in that case, it becomes very easy to understand a paper and to look for the information that you want. The next one is browser extensions. So what it does is that it has these extensions for like Google Chrome and Microsoft Edge and other browsers. So that way you can integrate this tool into your entire research process. And lastly, in the last section, I'll show you that how it has helped, how Scholarcy has helped PhD students in their PhD journey, or generally in their research journey. Okay, so we start with the libraries. As I mentioned, that Scholarcy, it helps you to organize your research papers. So as you can see here, so you can make different kind of folders. For example, education and work, science communication, marketing and advising. So the paper that you have, like for example, I might follow it differently. I might have folders like, for example, PhD students, postdoc, research assistant, myself. So I can divide papers based on who it is relevant to. But for PhD students or for early career researchers, it could be that, okay, a paper is in the education domain, or it is in science communication domain, or in psychology domain. So you can very easily organize your literature that way. Now, the next thing, or the second thing that I really like in this tool, is that it is very user friendly. So you can use it in a very easy way. Like for example, you can upload your papers so easily. You can import papers into this tool, and in one go you can, I believe, upload like around 64 documents to this particular tool. So the designers of this tool, the one good thing they have done is that they made it very easy to be used by researchers. Now, the feature that I talked about, flashcard. So what flashcard does is that, it extracts all the relevant or the important information from the paper for you and present it in a very easy to understand manner. So that way you don't have to go through the whole paper. You can simply look at the information extracted through a flashcard. In that way you would understand, okay, whether this paper is relevant, this paper is not relevant, or for what particular purpose this paper is relevant for me. Now, with the flashcard, what happens is that when it extracts the information from the paper for you, you can export that information. You can export it in a Word format, you can export it in a PowerPoint, in other formats like Excel, and so on and so forth. So that's another sort of useful aspect in this tool. Now, what I mentioned about research comparison. So what this tool does is that it compares the paper that you're looking into in the form of a snapshot or a flashcard, that they can tell you that, where it agrees with the previous research, where it disagrees with the previous research. So you don't have to all the time go back and forth and look for the previous papers and then compare it with them. This tool does it automatically for you. Okay. Now, the spotlight feature, that's another interesting feature. And what this feature does is that it's sort of like when we used to manually read papers and have a highlighter, and then we used to mark them down. So this is what this feature does for you. So it highlights the important points in the paper for you. And then, like you can see in this screenshot, that here the important point, this is the important point, like we investigated this thing in a paper, and that has already been highlighted by Scholarcy. as I mentioned that this tool, it can give you a customizable summary of the article. So this is certainly different than the abstract of the paper. You can summarize by section, you can rewrite it in third person, and you can also specify the length of the summary that you want of the paper. Okay, so that way it makes your job easier in terms of reading the papers and including relevant information, extracting relevant information, and then including that information in the literature review that you want to conduct. I already mentioned that you can integrate this tool into your web browsers. In that way, you can write, on the go, summarize papers, extract information from the papers, and so on. Okay, now, before we go into this part, I just want to quickly show you these features here. Let me unshare this part and share another screen. Here, so I believe that you are able to see my screen where you can see Scholarcy, and then you can see my libraries. So within, like, for example, if I go to my libraries, then I have here my library, and then you can see sample papers, that's one folder, primary studies, that's another folder, literature reviews, that's another folder. So let's suppose I go to sample papers. These are the list of papers that I have. Who is the author, what is the main focus of this paper, when it got published, and so on and so forth. And then let's suppose I want to go back. Yeah. So let's suppose I want to have a look at a paper. So here you see that what Scholarcy has done is that it has given me a snapshot that what is this paper about, the findings, objectives, methods, results, conclusions, analysis, okay? What's the quality of this research, and comparison, what the feature that I already mentioned that builds on existing research, confirms observation from previous studies, contrast other reports from prior research, and so on and so forth, okay? And then here we see the important points. So these are the important points that have been extracted from the paper. Let's suppose I click on this one. It would take me to the particular part where this one is. So you see this already highlights the important points in the paper, like we have reviewed the countermeasures based on their goals and so on and so forth. Now, other than that, if you see there is article summarizer, so it can summarize the paper for you and you can export the summary. Again, it gives you the research comparison, limitations, future work, and so on. So this is a very, makes it very easy for you to read the papers. Similarly, as I mentioned that it has these extensions, you can easily install these extensions so that you make it more an integral part of your research process. So we go back to the slides. So what the team of Scholarcy did was that they conducted a study and they reached out to PhD students, and what they wanted to find out was that how good Scholarcy is for these students. And they give them access, and after 6 weeks they contacted them again that how did you find out Scholarcy. So we have some results to show you that how good this tool is or how it can help you in your literature review. So if you look here, the first question was that how easy do you find approaching new literature. So the students answered like before Scholarcy and with Scholarcy. So we can see that the score significantly increased and the students found out that it was much easier to approach reading new literature when using Scholarcy. Okay, so we see a significant impact. Now, this is a very important question, and I'll share my experience that, how easy do you find retaining new information extracted from academic text? When I was a PhD student, I used to read a lot of papers. Okay, I used to even read when I used to go in the early morning to the university, and even on my way back, I used to read papers. But the problem is that not all of that information got retained. I would more read it like reading a newspaper. So with Scholarcy, this becomes much easier. You can retain information, you can make notes, you can add comments. In that way, you can use, that recorded information long down the way in your career. So with Scholarcy, it becomes easier. As you can see that many students reported that it becomes much easier to retain information using Scholarcy flashcards. The next question was that, do you feel that performing a literature review takes you a long time? So as you can see that, as is the focus of this webinar, that with Scholarcy, we see a significant impact. Conducting literature reviews becomes much more easier. So students, they were able to review literature more quickly with the help of Scholarcy. The next question was that, how easy do you find organizing and sorting papers you wish to reference? So again, as I mentioned, that I might have read thousands of papers, but I don't have a track of it. But with tools like Scholarcy, you can now keep track, you can organize your literature much better way. So students found out a significant impact that with Scholarcy, they were able to manage their collections of literature more effectively by using Scholarcy. And the last question was that, how difficult do you find comparing research outcomes from multiple academic texts? So if you remember the feature that we talked about, the research comparison, so that is what the students found, that comparing the outcomes of academic text was easier when using Scholarcy. Now, this tool, Scholarcy, I have used it, and as I showed to you, that it's quite useful for conducting literature reviews. If you need any support um, regarding Scholarcy and how to use it, or any other question, you can contact Oliver. Oliver himself is a researcher, and he is very supportive, so he can help you with anything related to Scholarcy.